Hi, and welcome to another episode of Everything Digital Health. I'm your host, Marcus Bohr. I'm here to talk about anything that I think is interesting in digital health, and today I'm going to talk to you about Royal Colleges 3.0, or a new model of getting stuff built that we need built in digital health. This has all been given a bit of a boost recently because I have managed to get a paper published. This is the first paper that I've actually ever published. I'm not a particularly academic doctor, and I've successfully avoided being involved in any publications until now, but I am the lead author on a publication, which I'm quite proud of. I'll put some links in the show notes. It's actually still open access on the Archives of Disease in Childhood website. Let's go right there, and I'll just talk you through that publication and then some of the thought process that goes behind it and why I think this is a really powerful way to get stuff done. So, RCPCH Incubator, a new model for building open, sustainable digital health. And I'll leave it to you to read the article. It's essentially quite a short opinion piece and mainly talks about the gap that exists between things that we wish was developed in the public domain, as it were, or by the NHS itself or by the NHS's IT teams, which sadly are very underdeveloped and don't really do the things that the system needs. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we've got commercial development, which is obviously something we rely on a lot. But importantly, they're not going to develop things that have no commercial future. And there are some things that just aren't particularly exciting. So software suppliers understandably prioritize areas with the commercial return, and they will stay away from areas that aren't really going to make them much money, and also where there is a lot of regulatory complexity. The other thing that we have in the NHS is that when we decide that we want something done, like a standard, we often then make a central decision to do that, and then we pay again and again and again to have that system, that same feature, built across all the clinical systems that are in use. So I mean, you could apply this to, say, QRisk, for example. So that's QRisk is an algorithm for checking out your level of cardiovascular risk, and there have been a few different versions of it. QRisk 2 is still in use in most GP surgeries, even though it's been deprecated for 10 years, because no one can quite work out how to pay the current suppliers to introduce QRisk 3, which is definitely a clinical medical device, and they don't really want to go into the area of having to register as a medical device. So we get this kind of market failure. That means tools that we need don't end up in the clinical systems that we get. And there's absolutely no doubt that there is a huge range of tools that clinicians want, whether it's things like pediatric early warning score, national early warning score, clinical calculators for all the little risk scoring systems that we use. They could all be built into our systems. But if you imagine that there are several hundred, if not thousands of them, and that we would have to ask each system to implement its own version of that algorithm. And there are no libraries for this, and there are no APIs for this. So every single system gets paid again and again and again to build the same features. And I just think that actually we literally cannot afford that. The costs of doing that across the NHS are prohibitive, so we don't do it. And that's why you as a clinician don't get the tools in your EPR that you wish you had. And I'm not saying that we've solved that in its entirety, but this is a new way of handling this problem, which is get Royal Colleges to build little modules of software that solve those often specialty specific problems. So in the case of the Royal College of Pediatrics, with whom I'm working, we've built digital growth charts in that way, and we built it deliberately to be separate from the systems, but very easy to integrate with the systems. And in that way, you can build an awful lot of infrastructure that all the systems can use. And if you look at the wider tech world, that is just how it works. I mean, People do not implement their own maps. They use Google Maps or Apple Maps or Leaflet or something like that. There are options in the wider tech world to solve some of the big thorny problems, and you do not find anybody re-implementing their own version of it, certainly not at the start of their journey. Maybe when they are a massive corporation with lots and lots of revenue, they might decide to stop using somebody else's API and essentially build something equivalent in-house. But that's something they can choose to do at the end of the process rather than at the beginning of the process. We're very much at the beginning of the process in the NHS. Here's some slides that I did a few years back, actually, but they still kind of essentially encapsulate what I'm trying to get across, which is this idea that Royal Colleges 3.0 is the future, or who's going to build the missing NHS tech infrastructure, because we are missing a lot of infrastructure. When you think about all the APIs that could exist, nobody is talking about building them, and yet nobody seems to think it's their responsibility either. So the commercial sector look at it and say, well, that doesn't seem particularly attractive. The NHS has made a decision to abolish NHS Digital, then England, and all the organisational capability that we had to build things has gone. So who's going to build it? Probably this is all known to you if you're watching my channel. I'm a GP, I'm based in Yorkshire. I'm banging on about open source all the time. I have done jobs on the inside, like RCGP Health Informatics Group. I've worked inside NHS England and NHS Digital, and I've worked outside the system as well. I'm a software developer for RCPCH, and I was part of the Public Money, Public Code campaign. So to reiterate that problem, we've got this massive amounts of effort to get less progress. So end user systems do not have those features. We talk about digital transformation, but I think it's a lie. I think it's talk, it's bluff and bluster, because a lot of the most transformative stuff doesn't translate into practical use in the front line. And the things that the frontline people really, really want never get built because there's no commercial product around them. We don't have those infrastructure things, and basically, ecosystems have to have dung beetles in them. You can't just have lions that are the king of the apex predator, making all the money, as it were. Having an ecosystem, which is what people talk about around healthcare, we want to have an ecosystem of lovely little apps that all talk to each other. Firstly, they don't talk to each other because it's not in their commercial interests to do so. And secondly, nobody wants to be the boring infrastructure. So somebody's going to have to step up and do that. And I think the opportunity is Royal Colleges can do this. So when I say technical infrastructure, I'm talking about little ubiquitous pieces of clinical end user feature, as it were. So having good digital growth charts, for example, is a straightforward example. Not all the clinical systems that we use have good digital growth charts. There should be digital growth charts in there, but if we were to pay them all to do good quality digital growth charts, you get two problems. One, you can't afford it, and two, they will all do a subtly different implementation. And that introduces error and danger and risk of there being quality issues. But we have these bodies that already exist, and they're already independent, and they're special. They have statutory rights to grant qualifications that are post-nominals, like MRCGP, which is a qualification I have. But all the other qualifications that you see for being an anaesthetist and being a surgeon and being a paediatrician, they all come from the respective Royal Colleges that grant those. Those colleges can set standards and they can uphold quality of practice. Most of them are charities. And when I'm talking about Royal Colleges, this is actually generalizable globally. It's just that in the Royal, in the part of the world I live in, we have, for whatever reason, a monarchy, and that implies a lot of these bodies are royal in some way, and that you see that across the Commonwealth in Canada and Australia as well. But these concepts of a medical college that has these functions, it exists everywhere. Royal Colleges 1.0 is like face-to-face committees. When they made a decision, they would then send out the guidance via a paper publication, either in a journal which came in the post, or you would send off by mail for the latest guidance. And conferences, by necessity, were just in-person things. Then we moved into the web era, where colleges all have a website. But I remember the period of time when some colleges didn't have a website, and their membership was saying, well, when are you going to have a website? And they genuinely, some of them said, we're not sure we need a website. It's the year 2000, but we don't think that's got much of a future. We're a serious organization. We do things in leather-bound books. That's all gone now. They've all accepted that they need a website, and now a Royal College with no website would just not exist. And I think that's a little bit of an allegory for the future. We've got to keep that in mind. Do we want to exist in 15 or 20 years' time? In a web world, you can now download guidance as PDF, which is better. It makes it a little bit more readily accessible. Instant access. Read it, digest it, try and memorize it all. Already, we're getting to the point where there's too much guidance to memorize and just remember it in case you need it or when you need it. And arguably now, because the guidance does change more rapidly, we shouldn't be relying on our memories anyway. We should be referring to the latest guidance every single time we see a patient with that condition, so that we're absolutely certain we're following the latest version. So what do I see in the future? Royal Colleges 3.0, best practice as code. And that means instead of relying on everybody's memory and downloading PDFs and trying to absorb it all as in a kind of upfront exercise of memory, we could deliver best practice as code. So that means software that guides you and teaches you through the process of delivering care. But crucially, by making reference to machine readable best practice. And like that is absolutely technically doable right now. It just isn't happening. So what I'd like to see is Royal Colleges moving into the world of developing their own software, which if you go back to the example of the websites, they thought, well, that's actually not for us. Yes, it is. You didn't think websites were for you, and that's just because you're slow moving organizations. But developing software is absolutely something they should be doing. The Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health has been a trailblazer in this and has done it already. We've been doing it for 5 years. We're very happy to export that learning to any other Royal College that wants to learn. But it does mean getting stuck in. There's no outsourcing option of this. You need a team that it has clinicians in it, and it has technical people in it, and it's based in your college. And if you try and do it any other way, it won't work. If colleges don't do this, I think gradually they will become obsolete, because their guidance will just be piles and piles and piles of PDF documents, really, that you can download from a website. And we will still have a massive gap between that guidance output and the things we use every day, which are our EPRs and the clinical digital tools that we use to do our jobs. The colleges could be building those clinical digital tools. And the colleges are in a unique position to do that because they're already trusted. It's also an opportunity. Regain a bit of clinical control, set standards, and it's commercial. Because if you're providing a feature for somebody else's EPR, then I don't think it's unreasonable for even a charity to charge for that. And at the Royal College, we have a commercial operation. We charge for access to the Digital Growth Charts API, but we only charge enough to make it sustainable. We're not feeding the mouths of shareholders. We're just making it so that we can continue to do healthcare tech development. There's a really important piece of work here that Margan Anastad has done about modular cultivational approach to digital transformation, which is instead of trying to fire it out of a cannon at the whole of your system, in our case, the NHS, you make small modular pieces of good stuff that people can adopt. And when one adopts it, and then two adopt it, then four adopt it, and then 10 adopt it, you gradually get to 100% adoption, but without having to use the usual sort of financial carrots or regulatory sticks. It's a third way. It's just people do it because it's good. And if you make it so that it's cheap and trusted, which is what we're talking about doing, they will do it. I've talked at the beginning about the increasing cost of digital, and we can't afford to pay every single EPR supplier in the world to implement every single feature that the world needs. So we know that it's not worked because simply the features that we want are not there. And in the future, we're looking at, genomics, proteomics, precision medicine. We're going to need even more complicated features to be built into systems. And I just think that the funding will fail to scale to the amount of cost that is. So we've got to modularize this stuff. And if you look at almost anything else in technology, it is modularized. If you want a wood screw to screw two pieces of wood together, you do not get a piece of brass and start making it yourself. You go and buy wood screws. They're a modular component you can just get. If you want a fuse because you're building an electronic device, you don't make your own fuses, you buy them. And everything like that in all of innovation throughout practically all of human history has been modularized. And we've got to do the same in software because we can't afford the alternative. The reason why I think it's slightly different in software, and again, why I've done other videos of why open source is so important in this, is because software is copyrighted and it's not patented. So with other types of engineering, things eventually become essentially like public domain, like the fuse I'm talking about. No one can claim that they have the patent on a normal household fuse. Anyone can make one. But we are saddled with software that is copyrighted, and it will continue to be copyrighted. Copyright lasts a very long time, 70 to 90 years in most countries, and that's after the death of the author. If the author is a corporation, then when does it die? It may never die. So yes, the code itself may have no value in 70 years' time, but it's the concepts, it's the intellectual property, it's the algorithms that need to be open source. Otherwise, we'll end up with essentially a completely proprietary medicine. Royal colleges are trusted to set standards in medical expertise areas. So if they produce guidance that says this is how to treat a particular condition that paediatricians treat, then the Royal College of Paediatricians would put out that guidance and people would follow it. So there's absolutely no reason why we can't take the stuff that's in PDFs and turn it into APIs and clinical decision support tools that can be embedded right in the software that you use so that you can do your job safer, better, faster, probably cheaper, but we all know that nothing ever goes down in cost. If we save money here, we spend it somewhere else, and that's fine. What we don't want to be doing is spending all the money in the healthcare system paying 50 EPR vendors to build one feature. I think there's a huge opportunity at the moment around ethics regulation, validation, data-driven technologies, all this stuff that's terribly exciting at the moment, but is absolutely exploding into the Wild West. Who's going to determine which of the digital therapeutics have efficacy? Who's going to prove that they actually work? Who's going to make the recommendations? And it's also an area of conflict. I think NICE guidance exists to make recommendations like this, but if they recommend a particular product, they're essentially it's a blank check being written to a software company, and the NHS will never ever stop paying money for that software because it will never become public domain. So I'll link to at the end of this episode to my other video, which is about that. But this is a solution to it. We build open source stuff in Royal Colleges, and we already know it works because I've been doing it for 5 years. This is an example. I'm going to talk about growth charts. This is a paper growth chart, which has been artificially distressed for the purposes of this image by my colleague Simon Chapman, who's a paediatrician in London. But this is what is normally used in clinics, a bit of card, and it's essentially a paper calculator. You input dots of the gestational age or the age of the child, and then you mark off their height, weight, length, etc. And depending on what the line they're on, you can then read off what their growth is like. And if you see in the bottom of the weight one here in the middle, there's a little pretend failure to thrive line there. So the dots are gradually drifting downwards through the lines. I know they look like they're going up, but you've got to follow the curved lines, and it's gone down through centile lines, which means this child is not growing as well as they should be. This is a tool that's used in clinical medicine to pick up children who have got some kind of problem with them. It could be anything that's wrong with them. They could have a syndrome, they could have a feeding problem, they could be being maltreated. This is a very sensitive tool for picking up the children who are not doing so well, and then we have to go and work out why. So crucially, we have to be measuring children, putting on these charts. But these are paper charts, and everything about the last 20 years has been digital, hasn't it? So where are the digital charts? So we built an API that did that. We've made it sustainable by having a clear business model, which I talked about before. It's a service we provide. You pay per request, essentially in bulk, but per request kind of thing. And that allows us to develop the thing, generate revenue, and grow the tech team. And it also means that we're not going to ever have to stop doing this web service. It has to be sustainable. And that means we can build other APIs, which we actually have. We've built things to do with census data and deprivation. So we've got other API endpoints you can now use. And that model, if we took that and made every Royal College capable of building these things, then all of the things that we need in clinical practice would be solved. And we would have a clear roadmap to getting them all added as API endpoints. And then you only have to go to the EPR vendors and say, integrate with this API. You don't need to ask them to build the feature themselves. And bearing in mind that some of these features are complicated and there is clinical risk, some of them are medical devices like growth charts, it's expensive to build them and there is a real risk of getting the algorithm wrong. So just build the algorithm correctly once, buy a Royal College, open source it, make sure, because it's public, all bugs are shallow. As Linus's law goes, with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow. And so if you publish your code and there is an algorithm bug in it, somebody will pick that up and say, hang on, you've got a bug here, and we can fix it. So I like to spread the idea of best practice, as a service to other colleges. And that's the purpose of this video, really, is just to try and sort of get that message out there. I've been talking about it for several years. I've written blog posts, I've done presentations. I've published it in a prestigious medical journal. I'm really just trying to get the message out there. It isn't going to be a silver bullet that solves everybody's problems everywhere, but it's better than what we've got now. As far as I know, we are the only college that's got this kind of stuff going on. I've checked GitHub to see if any other Royal Colleges have got clinical repositories on there. Some of the Royal Colleges in the UK have got an organisational account on GitHub. None of them have got any clinical code on there. They've all got something to support their website or something like that. So we're the only Royal College in the world I'm aware of that's gone into like providing web services, APIs, best practice as a service, best practice as code. I think it's the future. Please let me know what you think. I know that these ideas are sometimes a little bit challenging for the status quo. I'd like to see what whether this is do people think this is going to fly? Am I deluded? I think we've got something here that can scale, and I'd like really to hear from other people who want to make this model better. And in particular, I want to hear from the other Royal Colleges. How are we going to get this into every Royal College? Who's going to be the next first move? Thank you for listening, and I hope you're enjoying the channel. If you've got any feedback for me, then you know what to do. Please do share the videos if you find them in any way helpful or interesting. It's quite a niche area that I'm in here, but it'd be nice to maximize that voice. Do like, do subscribe, all the YouTube things, and I'll see you in the next one.